Welcome once again to GPS, God's Prophetic Surprises. I'm Jon Paulien, and with me is Philip Milosavljevic.
Wow, excellent.
That's close.
Excellent.
It's not perfect, but it's close. I think
Pretty good. Milosavljevic.
There's a V in there, something that I don't quite get out, but we got you. All right, and then Shifra Fepuleai.
Oh, wow.
Oh, nice.
Really good at
He's
that.
very good.
And, from the South Pacific.
Yes.
And both of you guys are full Americans, but bringing traditions.
Thank
Your
you.
tradition is not South Pacific.
No, I'm Eastern European.
Eastern European.
Yeah, my dad is Serbian, my mother's Croatian, and I was born in Bosnia.
That means you're totally confused.
Yes. World War III at our house.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hopefully you weren't born in Banja Luka, which is the border town between the
No,
warring factions.
I was actually born in Sarajevo, which was right at the epicenter of the war effort. So.
Because all the various communities were there in Sarajevo.
They were. You know, and what's interesting, my uncle was the ADRA director in Sarajevo during the war, and so our family was quite involved in what was happening and trying to get medical supplies and medicine and Bibles and anything we could into the city.
Even just a little bit of spy stuff, kind of?
I can't talk about it.
Okay.
Can't talk about it.
Well, in the next program, we'll talk about some of the travel that we've done since our last time together, and I'll have something to say about that.
All right.
That'll be fun. But since the last time we recorded, the two of you spoke for chapel at Loma University, and that is broadcast live on LLBN, so some of our audience may well have seen that. But tell me what it was like to preach to 2,000 students plus an international audience live.
Shifra, let you answer it.
Oh, I really enjoyed your sermon, and I remember texting you after I preached, and your comment was great. So this is the answer. It makes you feel like a real young adult pastor when you're preaching to that many students and hearing them respond to the gospel. It's a beautiful thing to dispense that much hope. When you're in medical school, dental school, and all of that, it's easy to keep your head down, but when I was preaching, I was happy to see a majority engaged and to know that the power of God can penetrate the whirlwind of busyness is encouraging.
Yeah. I think the other thing that I find fascinating, speaking at chapel in particular, is that you're not speaking simply to a Christian audience. Because we're a university that accepts students from all walks of life, countries, demographics, you're really speaking to a multicultural, multi-religious congregation. So for me, that was unique in that I had to be very thoughtful in my illustrations. I tried to pull illustrations from the East. I read a poem from Asia that is very well known in the Middle East. And then I had to use some current cultural illustrations. So just trying to tie everything in so that it speaks to everyone at the same time. Which is a challenge, and yet, it, like Shifra said, it's exhilarating to be able to share the gospel to that large of an audience.
And it's possible that Loma University has a higher percentage of non-Christian religions among the students, simply because there aren't too many universities where a Muslim or a Hindu or a Buddhist can get their education in a place that affirms faith. So many universities these days do not affirm faith, and I find that the non-Christian students at Loma Linda feel that being in a faith-affirming place that is not judgmental toward the differences that they might feel is a tremendous blessing to them. They feel very much at home.
Absolutely. I think the other thing I do want to say, though, is I don't feel as though there is a need to apologize for Christianity or Adventism when you get to speak in chapel. I think people really resonate with understanding. Oh, that's what you believe. Oh, that's how you guys understand that. That's interesting. I think it needs to be done tastefully, obviously, always tastefully, as the opportunity when Scripture says, hey, do whatever you can so you may win some over, you know.
Well, something I'm planning to do on campus sometime early in 2020 is the idea of what if Jesus had never been born? And just explore that question. You know, if Jesus had never been born, how would the world be different?
Wow.
And I think when you see that, you can understand that Christianity's claim is a powerful one. And the claim is that God himself said, I want people to understand, people on earth to understand who I am. And what better way to do that than come down myself?
Yeah.
And that's a huge claim.
Yeah.
And a lot of people may treat it with some skepticism, but it's a huge claim. And when you look at what Jesus did and the difference that it made, the claim shines pretty bright. Because if Jesus was who he claimed to be, it's no wonder that he had the impact that he had. But anyway, that's something working on for the future.
Before we transition, I want to say it was cool to see you there too, supporting at the chapel.
I was there for both of you.
Yeah, and you had traveled internationally, and you were still able to be there. So you've been up to quite a bit as usual.
Yeah, I was
since the
jet
last
lagged a
time.
bit for yours. I do vaguely remember that you were speaking, which is why I brought it up. So anyway, we want to get to one of the most challenging passages in all of the New Testament, the two witnesses of Revelation. Scholars debate about this. The passage is very simple, and yet what it doesn't say makes it difficult to understand at times. And so God's prophetic surprises may emerge as we take a deeper look at this passage. So Philip, why don't you read Revelation 11, 3-6,
Yeah.
and when you're done, I'll ask Shifra to give some thoughts about the passage.
Sure, let's do that right now. And I will grant authority to my two witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. These are the two olive trees and the two lampstands that stand before the Lord of the earth. And if anyone would harm them, fire pours forth from their mouth and consumes their foes. If anyone would harm them, this is how he is doomed to be killed. They have the power to shut the sky that no rain will fall during the days of their prophesying. And they have power over the waters to turn them into blood and to strike the earth with every kind of plague as often as they desire.
Mercy.
Whoa.
Okay, so you see, it's simple in a way. Figuring out what it is saying is not difficult. Figuring out what it means
Right.
Yeah.
is something else. What do
Yeah.
you think it means, Shifra?
Well, you know what? There are some themes that I'm seeing here, just intertextually. So let's start from verse 6. These two witnesses, they're described in action or in power to have some things that remind me of Elijah, right? So they have the power to shut up the sky so that it won't rain during the time they are prophesying. So it reminds me of that. And then to turn the waters into blood and strike the earth with every kind of plague kind of reminds me of Moses, right? And the whole Egypt delivering God's people to freedom theme. I mean, these two witnesses, if I weren't to read verse 7, I mean, they've got superpowers. They almost seem like nothing can harm them.
Yeah.
Those that want to harm them are going to die. This is how they're going to die. They have the power to do this and that. But it's interesting that these two witnesses that are given power are clothed in sackcloth and prophesy for a very specific amount of days. So
It's interesting because the drought in Elijah's day was 3.5 years. So that connection that you're suggesting is a strong one. And you mentioned the two witnesses seem super powerful, and then they die. Well, doesn't that remind you of Jesus? Because didn't he say, I could call 12 legions of angels, was it? And to deliver me at any point. Why didn't he?
love.
Love.
Had to die.
Did he love the people who were crucifying him? evidently.
He must have.
Yeah. I mean, that's something, we think of enemies. This is a God's prophetic surprise right here.
Right,
Okay?
that's true.
When we think of enemies, we think of people whose lives are not worth saving. And if they get wounded on a battlefield, just finish them off. Put them out of their misery, because they're not worth saving.
Don't deserve it.
And yet Jesus was so solicitous of the lives of his tormentors.
Enemies, yeah.
He could have crushed them like a bug, and he didn't. And that tells us something about the character of God, what God is like. And I've had kind of a mixed experience with character of God, in the sense that I probably grew up with the idea that, there was a good cop, bad cop routine. There was the kind God, Jesus, and then there's this other guy in the Old Testament who wipes out the world with a flood and 185,000 Assyrians, and sends she-bears against 42 teenagers and all kinds of stuff like that. And trying to put those two together, I kind of had this double picture of God. Probably the scary one got more of my attention. And so I've really appreciated in recent years, as I've seen the Bible as a whole, to realize that what Jesus lived is the way God wants to be. If God destroyed the world with a flood, it's not what God wanted to do. It's what God had to do in order to save the world. That's a tough one, but apparently the world had gotten to such a place that had God not done it, it would have been even worse. He might have lost all contact with the human race. I mean, after all, there was only 8 people that survived the flood, and they weren't any great examples of, godliness or anything like that. So in crisis modes, like a school teacher, God can raise his voice. But the way Jesus behaved was the living embodiment of what God is like. When in John 13, Jesus said, knowing who he is, knowing where he came from, knowing where he's going, wash the disciples' feet. He was consciously saying, this is what God is like. And then in chapter later, he says, if you've seen me washing feet, you've seen the Father. If the Father had come down, he would have been no different than Jesus was. If the Father had taken on human flesh, he would have washed feet too. And it was that recollection that I came to realize that is the Bible clarifying who God is. And all that other stuff, the flood, the 185,000, all of that has to be interpreted in the light of God's purpose. So for me, clarifying the character of God is a pretty central thing.
That's good.
So looking at the text, in verse 3, it says, I will give. Future tense. Why future?
I mean, it's future from John's time, right? So that's...
But if this is a prophecy, I mean, many have interpreted the 1260 days as being like the Middle Ages and stuff.
Okay.
So why the future here? Where is John's day?
John's day is
1st century.
so.
How do we know this is from the perspective of the 1st century?
I'm just hoping this is not a trick question, because it seems pretty straightforward to me.
Here's looking at you to answer a trick question. Yeah.
I mean, John's writing the book of Revelation. So.
Well, do you remember in the book of Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar has this dream vision. And in that vision, he's taken to the end of time. And he sees all the future empires and stuff. But then Daniel comes to him and explains the vision. So in the vision, he can be taken any time and any place. But when Daniel comes to explain the vision, he's plugged into Nebuchadnezzar's time. He says, hey, dude, you're the head of gold. And after you is another kingdom.
Right.
And after that is another and another. And then finally comes the kingdom of God. Okay. So the explanation comes in his time and place.
Yeah.
Are we in a vision or an explanation here?
chapter 10 says, then I saw another mighty angel coming down from heaven.
Okay, and that was vision. In chapter 10, you have a vision in verses 1 through 7. But then in verse 8,
5.
the angel comes to John
Then the voice
and
that I
says, here,
heard.
take the book out of my hand and eat it, and you'll see what happens to you.
Its explanation.
And you must prophesy again, etc. So we are located in chapter 11 in John's day.
Good.
John is receiving an explanation of the vision of chapter 10, 1 to 7. So just like Daniel 2, Daniel 7, other places, you have a vision and then an explanation.
Yep.
So when it says, I will, give, and there will be 1,260 days, that's John's future. So that helps us locate the time here.
That's great. So right before verse 3, when we said that they will trample, that's future tense, on the holy city for 42 months. So we also know that's an explanation
Yeah.
in future tense to John's day.
Yeah.
First century.
So the future is the primary time of this whole chapter 11 here. You'll see at the key verbs are future, or occasionally an aorist subjunctive, which is a Greek way of saying something that hasn't happened yet. It can use past tense, but it's a past tense that hasn't happened yet. So it's like a future.
Now, what's the significance of placing this within a time frame as opposed to the details of this? How does this help us?
Well, typically, apocalyptic prophecies run from the prophet's day to the end. So you start where the prophet is, and you end up with God's kingdom. You end up with the second coming of Jesus. You end up with New Jerusalem, different ways of expressing it. But apocalyptic prophecies tend to be a sequence of events going from the prophet's day to the end of time. And in chapter 11, you start in John's day. You must prophesy again. And then you talk about 42 months and 1,260 days in the future. And then the two witnesses are killed. And then they rise again. And they ascend to heaven, and things happen on the earth.
Amazing.
So in chapter 11, you've got three main divisions. You have verses 1 and 2, which introduce the idea of the 1,260 days in the future. In verses 3 to 6, you have the identity of the two witnesses is the focus. We're going to look at them and get some idea of who they are and how they function. And then the completion of the vision is verses 7 to 13, future, even beyond the 1,260 and the 42 months.
Good.
So you have a time sequence here in chapter 11, which helps us to see that it's apocalyptic. Like Daniel 2, like Daniel 7, there's historical progression. So God is ahead of time giving us some explanations of history from the time of Revelation until the end.
Cool.
And what would the use of that be?
Preparation.
Preparation.
Faith affirmation. Go through the times.
I think it's essential for in a sense of belief and trust that you're following someone who knows where they're going.
True.
I think that's very helpful. If God didn't give us prophecy, I think that would be an interesting question to talk through. If he didn't say where things are heading.
That's a great question.
Yeah. Well, this maybe is an analogy here, but I've discovered something. Football games take a long time. I do find them interesting. But boy, taking all that time, it's like 3.5 hours of time. And I found something called NFL Game Pass. You can watch a condensed version of the game. But it's only like a couple seconds between each play, and bang, 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 you go through. So you have to be after the game is over, obviously. You can't do that during the game unless you have one of these TiVo things. I suppose you can just delay it, and then, but still you're watching after the fact. But the thing about that, the condensed version, saves you a bunch of time, but then you often know the outcome. And here's the interesting part. If my favorite team is playing, and I know the outcome, I can enjoy the game without worrying about the outcome.
Yeah.
And when they look like they're in trouble, they're getting beat up, and they're not going anywhere, and I say, it's all right. They're going to pull this out. Just let's see how it happens.
Yeah.
You see? And so Bible prophecy is kind of that way, God giving people a glimpse ahead of time of the game and its outcome. So that when we actually live through that time, we don't have to live in fear and uncertainty.
And I also think, like, to your question, like, if your loved one knew that there was something hazardous ahead and didn't reach back to you to let you know, to warn you, like there's a fire coming. I mean, just trying to be relatable to California, right?
Oh,
so like,
boy.
you know, pack up and go, evacuate, you know, now before it comes, like it would be unloving, right? So I was thrilled by your question, because if God didn't prophesy and let us know, I'm not and he knows, right? I'm not sure what that would say about his character. I don't think that would be too good. But because of God's goodness and God's love, he takes the time to let us know his divine foreknowledge enough so that we could relax and go through it. Well, not relax, but you know, with peace that the world does not give, that peace that only Jesus gives, go through it knowing the outcome.
Yeah.
I think there's a way of then relating to the whole circumstance of our current time period. And the question then is, if we know the outcome, what does that mean for us in this season of life when the outcome has not yet been played out? When you're in the second quarter and you're down by 30 points, but you know you're going to win in the end, what do you do in this season then right now? What do you do right now when life is challenging?
Oh man, can I sit here for a moment? I just got chills. I just spent so many hours talking to a table full, let's put it that way, a table full of students. I think we had a psychiatrist, a PhD therapist student, dental students, you know, so different students. And you all work on the campus, so you know the dynamic. What we didn't have was a lawyer. And, you know, and then a few theologians. And the theme of the night was, we don't trust the judiciary system, right? So we've got a civil rights statute from 1865 that's in the Supreme Court case right now. How is it that civil rights are being questioned or supposedly threatened? We have Rodney Reed, who 2 million people have signed a petition to stay his execution. It's scheduled for, you know, a few days from now. But there's surmounting evidence, these 2 million plus people say, to merit a new trial. So there's celebrities that have leaned in, Oprah, Dr. Phil, Sean King, other activists as well, and people who can use their influence to stay this execution. If they execute him, I mean, what's that going to do to the confidence that some people have in the judiciary system, right, or in the government? And then there are people like, you know, that have come from different seasons in history, different generations that just never did trust the judiciary system or the government system. They know not to trust. And there was this theme of like hopelessness and feeling stuck. Like, how can you solve such issues like racial prejudice and discrimination and government oppression and not trusting, you know, all these earthly systems? How do you solve it until Jesus comes? And there's this sense that to know the outcome is really our only hope. To know that the book of Revelation gives a message that zooms so far out of our day and age to an age when all will be well. Like, that can really be your only hope.
Yeah.
And if there's a cosmic conflict, and everything we're involved in, every detail of it is part of that larger battle, then our mission is not to solve the universe. We're not going to solve the universe. We're not going to bring this thing to a positive end. God is going to do that. But we can cooperate with God in our part of the battlefield, if you want to use that analogy, and whatever lies in front of us. When a mother's awakened by a crying baby at 3 a.m, that's part of a much bigger picture. And to be faithful in those little things, when you're cleaning the house, to be faithful and do it to the best of your ability is saying something about a much bigger picture. So this idea helps us to really focus our lives in a productive direction.
So what you guys are both bringing up is the hope lies that we know the end. So in this tribulation, recognize that it will turn out for the best, but be faithful with what you've been given. So there is still something to say, hey, though the world is unjust, do your part to make it just. I mean, that should be part of it too.
Yeah. Well, my little part of the battle may not go well, but still to be faithful in doing that part, maybe holding out so that some other part of the army, if you want to use that analogy, can come around and do what it needs to do.
You know, that seems somewhat, though, what value does life have if your portion is, quote unquote, in vain almost? And I know you point out, like, well, maybe some element of this can have some good in some space. But what does it prove, like, to a child who dies prematurely? For what end came about as a result of that? What end is it when someone...
From a military perspective, a general sometimes has to choose to lose in one part in order to win in another. And I think of the Korean War, when the Americans and their allies were kind of bunched into one corner of the peninsula, and the pressure was all throw the reserves in there and save, the last free part of Korea. Instead, MacArthur took the reserves and came in way up north, and in the process completely collapsed the enemy powers. Now those in Busan would have liked to have had reinforcements. Things may not have gone well for them for the week or two that they were not getting the reinforcements they'd been hoping for. But they held out until the larger picture got clarified, and then the enemy collapsed and they were able to recover the territories that they had lost. So sometimes in the bigger picture, there are going to be losses in specific parts. And prophecy tells us that when things don't go well where we are, it isn't necessarily our fault. It's just as part of a much bigger picture. And being faithful is more important than being successful in that little piece of the battlefield. Now, I know military imagery is not everybody's favorite thing, but it is one that the Bible often uses to clarify these kinds of things.
Yeah.
So,
the two witnesses here, we didn't necessarily fully understand just yet.
yeah.
But I think what we did explain is there is a future hope that we can rely on and hold on to.
Yeah.
And I think that's exciting. And I know that we've still yet to understand the significance of what happened here. But if someone's going through something right now in their life, I think there's a lot to say, hey, hold on, be faithful. It's not over. The war has not yet ended.
That's right.
Yeah.
Blessing. All right. Well, that brings us to a conclusion of GPS once again. We thank you for being with us, and we invite you to join us again next week on God's Prophetic Surprises.